I was really excited to talk to you when I found your show there,
Oh,
the Redwood Wonk.
uh-huh.
Have you been doing that for some time?
Well, I've been doing that show for a couple of years now, but I've actually been doing a radio talk show on KMUD, All Things Reconsidered, for about 22 years now. So, uh,
22 years. Wow.
yeah. Yes, I've long passed the statute of limitations for NPR to sue me for, I mean, it's satire, but, anyways, for that. But, yeah, I've been doing radio for a little while, fun radio.
So how did you get into the Redwood Wonk? Was that just
Redwood
kind of a
Wonk.
spinoff?
Well, I used when KHSU was what it used to be. I got invited to do Thursday night talk there. I had a once a month Thursday night talk on that show, and then Matt invited me over to Access Humboldt to. Well, actually, it started out somebody.
I'm sorry, could you just try to keep that like a fist away? You can pull
Sure.
it, do whatever you got to do
Sure.
for it.
Yeah, at first I was invited to their little station over in Arcata to do radio shows, and then Matt said, "Why don't you come and do it on video too?" And so started out with another partner, but then later it was Dave and I became the regulars, and it just evolved. It was, but Matt and I knew each other from KHSU.
Matt Knight.
Yeah, Matt.
Okay.
Knight, right?
Yeah. And so it started over at Access Humboldt.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you have any? Did he kind of persuade you to start it there, or how did that work
Oh, well,
out?
no, I was working with a couple of people on the radio thing at Arcata, and then he was listening to it, and he said, "Why don't you do this on video too?" And so we actually were just getting into the pandemic when it started. So this was 2020. So I've actually never actually been into their studio for a production. We've been doing everything by Skype so far. But I do want to get in and do a sit down like this one.
Yeah, I've noticed that they looked like it was Zoom or Skype, one of those two.
Yeah, and it works that way because I get off work, Dave gets off work, and it's worked that way. But I want to get in there, especially since occasionally we'll have a third person guest or something like that. And
Is Dave local?
Oh yeah, Dave.
Okay.
Dave also works with Access Humboldt and also has a KMUD show.
Oh wow!
So, yeah.
Oh, small world.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that how you two met? Was through KMUD?
No, we met one time because I had when I had my previous partner who works for Lost Coast. He's the DJ that. He had to stop because he went full time managing the station, not live 105. That's San Francisco station, The Point 103, and so he had to stop, and so Dave came on. He had periodically filled in, and he just became the regular. So that's how I met him. But I've seen him around a lot, and we just got to know each other even better. And we get called in to do political commentary at KMUD, like election night. We're part of the pantheon that comes in and talks, pretends like we're like CNN's talking heads or something.
Yeah, you guys have a good dynamic going, the two of you.
It's fun. Yeah.
What was the desire to go politics?
Well, that's what I've always done. It all started way back when I moved up here in the late 90s. I was working for an attorney. I just got out of law school, and his name was Les Sher. He's passed away now. But he was one of the first hippie attorneys to come with the Back to the Land movement. I sent out resumes and landed a job up here. And for one thing, I knew where Garberville was. That was a big deal. I knew what I was getting into. And he was always invited into KMUD to every election to talk about the ballot propositions, but he didn't really like it. And so one time he said, I'm kind of busy. Why don't you go in and do that? So I went in and did it, and I loved it. And so I just kept doing it, and I got into it so much that they just started calling me because
Instead of him.
I was right instead of him, because I would get into it. I'd get into the pros and cons. He would just sort of like, this is how you should vote, blah, 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 but I would like try to say, well, all right, this is how I'm voting, but if you want to consider this side of it, you would probably want to vote the other way. So they got, and then eventually the programmer Michael Jacinto, who unfortunately recently passed away, he was the program director, said, would you be interested in doing a talk show? And so I said, well, okay, that sounds like fun. I was really nervous at the time, and just and so it was, I think, about January, February of 2000. The first, they said, what do you want to call it? As a joke, I threw out, how about all things reconsidered? Because I wanted my theme to be kind of creative thinking. One of the things I do is I try to challenge people. I try to have people come on who are like uh, antithetical to their stated belief system. For instance, I would have a dyed-in-the-wool socialist who is extremely not just critical of Cuba, but was condemned Castro. But he'd be more socialist than anybody else. But he just absolutely does not like Stalin, what he would call Stalinist regimes. He believes in democracy too, right? So, or an environmentalist who supports nuclear power, which it turns out there's a whole generation that are looking at it and saying, "Look, we got climate change, and take a look at the new technology. It's not what it used to be." So I try to get people who sort of think so. It's all things reconsidered. Try to get people to rethink their basic assumptions. Because the very first show I had was about the Second Amendment and gun control, and I learned that
That's a hot issue.
well, yeah, but the interesting thing down there is you have all these hippies who are left wing in so many different ways, but not really on that issue. A lot of them own guns. It's sort of mandatory if you live out in the hills. You kind of need them, and they didn't want to have anything to do with the NRA. They think it's a joke of an organization, politically speaking. But they feel like, well, first of all, it's in the Bill of Rights, and you damage one amendment, you give a precedent for the government to weaken the Second Amendment, then they'll weaken the First or the Fourth or the Fifth. So as long as it's the Bill of Rights, it's got to be honored. That actually is sort of the official ACLU position. It has been. They don't play
Really
it up
use
as
it,
much.
yeah.
And the rest. And the other thing is out here in rural life, we need it, and especially if you're growing pot and you got people coming up from other places and busting into your place. It's obviously a necessity, or other things, bears or whatever. But it's just so it's a part of their life, and they also, despite being left wing, have a kind of a libertarian streak to them. Like, okay, yeah, I'm all for maybe even socialism, but I want it to be like laissez-faire socialism, not necessarily a centralized government kind of a thing. It's very interesting moving here and learning these things. So that was my first show to have, asking people's opinions about it, and I was giving sort of the lawyer perspective on it, because that was my perspective. I mean, I don't own guns, never planned to, and I wouldn't really care whether there were a lot stronger gun controls, except that it is in the Bill of Rights. And and they were like, and so somebody once said, well, you're a hypocrite because you would oppose laws here that you wouldn't oppose in Canada. I'm like, yeah, because it's not in a Bill of Rights in Canada. It's about how the law works. And so anyway, that was that's what I try to do, is try to have. I don't want to just have it be like a lot of other talk shows where it's just we're just regurgitating, talking to the choir and regurgitating things we always believe. I want to challenge things, and sometimes I'll just be a total devil's advocate. People will get really mad at me, and then the next day in the grocery store, because down there, when I lived down there, you'd run into them a lot. Do you really believe that? And I said, no, but
I was just making the argument.
but it was fun.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. So then when I came up here, they wanted me to focus more on national politics, kind of along NPR line and the rest. And I said, okay, that's fine, because I do pay attention to it. And so that's what Redwood Wonk is about.
That's interesting that you sought out people who had that kind of antithetical view to their character, because most people don't do that. Like you said, most talk shows, we're reinforcing whatever idea we want to reinforce.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've been through a lot of changes in my own life. I mean, I just and so I'm fascinated. Actually, in fact, I actually would like to write a book on famous people who have gone through major changes in their political. Where a lot of people are famous for moving right to left, but a lot of people don't know that there are a lot of people move from left to right. And what does it? What does that? There's an old joke that that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, and the counter joke is, well, a liberal or even a radical is a conservative who's had a run-in with the cops. So you have different sets of experiences as to what makes you go one way or another, and you notice that there's certain careers that people go into that maybe send them one way or another, but in certain events maybe do that. But it's fascinating because there's no real solid pattern to it. But 9/11 was a big one that moved a lot of people rightward. But the Vietnam War was an event that moved a lot of people leftward, saying, "Yeah, I've got second guessing this whole concept of us being the cops of the world, right?" And then it makes you start to question other things, and for instance, Lynn Cheney right now is the pariah of the Republican Party.
And she's paraded by the Democrats, which is really
for now,
weird.
which is really weird because I'm not really going to I'll respect her, but I'm not going to celebrate anything until she changes her position on torture. But do that. I'm glad she now recognizes that her sister's a human being. That type of a thing, and I respect her because she did basically end her electoral career taking a stand. I'll respect that. I'm not going to vote for her. But
well, and if you look at her voting record, she's basically aligned with the Republican Party.
And with Trump, 93% of the time. Yeah, it was but it doesn't matter with that crowd. It's all or nothing.
It's Trump or nothing.
Yeah, it's basically. And so, and is Trump even really a conservative? I sort of think Trump is basically whatever he needs to be that meets his needs in the moment. I don't even know if he knows what it is, it's just half the time. So I'm sort of wandering from topic to topic here, but she's somebody that I would love to interview because I bet in a few years, because she's going to be exposed to more people, that it's going to affect the way she has outlook. She might not change her positions diametrically, but she'll look at them differently. I see that on the Supreme Court. Almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody who went on to the Supreme Court, very conservative, has moved to the left over the years. Brennan was a Republican appointee under Eisenhower. Sandra Day O'Connor, Blackmun, was a Nixon appointee who was reversing himself, became an opponent of the death penalty after a while, was the last one who was absolutely against the death penalty. There's a tendency, and my theory is that they, once they're there, they don't owe anything to anybody at that point. There's nobody who can get them removed except for by an impeachment process that's, as we know, doesn't really happen. And so they're in for life. And so they're there day after day being affected by smart people every day who are making all kinds of arguments and talking to them about all kinds of things. And sometimes when people get older, they chill out a little bit. We'll see if the current crowd does.
Do you anticipate that happening?
Maybe with a couple of them, Roberts, is, an interesting guy. And I think he's like, man, look what's happening. He's like one of the old style, moderate Republicans that are on there. But when you're in a religion like Amy Coney Barrett is, I don't know how much it governs what she does. Maybe not. She sounds okay when she's talking, right? She doesn't want it to be that way. I just don't know. Kavanaugh, I just have no idea. He obviously is a very angry person. He was accused either falsely or truthfully, I don't know. I found her credible, but I don't know, but he was all real angry at that and seems to have a chip on his shoulder about it. The other two, some of them never do change. They are just locked in and they've got their ideology and that's what they have. But Sandra Day O'Connor, she was a Reagan appointee, and by the time she was off the court, she was, considered a raging liberal in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't think, and I'm
Yeah.
too young to really have a formed opinion on this, but I
Uh-huh.
don't think that the party lines were quite as
They
rigid.
weren't.
Yeah,
They weren't.
that seems to be my
In
understanding.
fact, if you look at the debate between Bush and Reagan back in 1980 when they were running against each other before they became the mates, running mates, which everybody looked at that and said, "How is that going to happen?" But it happened. What they say about immigration, you would think that they were like in the left wing of the Democratic Party today. That's evolved. That whole concept. Now, granted, immigration has increased a lot more since then, but they all talked about at least in much more humane terms than that were discussed. There's a video of it on YouTube. You can find it. I mean, they're like talking like somebody in the sanctuary movement would talk practically. It's wild. But that doesn't mean he was any less liberal. In 1960, Reagan had a speech you can also find on YouTube calling Medicare socialism. So he went from being a liberal to conservative to mellowing out again. Sometimes you go back and forth a little.
What do you think causes that?
It's just
Just experience
I think
with
there's
age?
different things. I think you've got you've got different things. As I've noticed, it's again it depends on what you're into. Soldiers tend to move to the left, especially as they get older. Officers do. Admiral LaRocque became a pinnacle of the peace movement. McNamara, who was basically the architect of the Vietnam War, was an advocate for nuclear freeze for and the rest. Country singers, when they get older, tend to move to the left. The whole what do you call it? What was the crowd that had Johnny Cash and were they the Highwaymen? I can't remember, but it was anyway. It had Chris Christopherson, Johnny Cash. It was sort of like the super team of the country stars. All of them were basically left wing. Willie Nelson, and I'm forgetting who the fourth was, but and priests. They're young, they're kind of intense. They get older, they mellow out. But then you get pundits like Chris Hitchens, brilliant guy, and I loved listening to him right and left. And he'll tell you he never really went right. He'll tell you he just was smarter about it, but he didn't. He said he wasn't really a socialist, but his ideas didn't really change all that much. He just said the left became more dogmatic, and he felt he needed to stand up to that. Max Eastman. What made him do it? Well, a lot of the horrors coming out of the Soviet Union that a lot of the left refused to acknowledge, not just the communist left, but even a lot of the liberal left that just didn't want to deal with it until the Khrushchev report came out and said, Stalin's purges killed more than Hitler did in his death camps, right?
Well, those circumstances make sense, right? Especially with soldiers that go off to wars. You see this violence,
right?
And you come home and maybe you have a family. You don't want your child to go experience what you went through. So it would track that you would switch your stance on that.
Right. Or you see a whole country against you and you're wondering, why are these people trying to kill me? I want them to be free, right? And you start to think about why it's one thing, the soldiers, but why are the people shooting at me, right?
Or why are we here? I mean, you take Iraq, for example.
Yeah.
Why are we here?
Right.
And then you come home and you feel that it was all for nothing.
Yeah. Although it's not all at once. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched Born on the 4th of July about Ron Kovic. Excellent movie. Tom Cruise plays him. Doesn't look anything like the real Ron Kovic, but it's a real guy who became paraplegic because of the war. Went in completely right wing, gung ho. America, love it or leave it. He says that through the first half of the movie, including when his brother becomes a protester against the war, his brother and sister. And even when he gets back for the longest time, he's like, hardcore. It's his former high school girlfriend, played by Kira Sedgwick, who starts to get him to loosen up, and then he starts to kind of think about things. And at the end, and this is real life, he was protesting outside the Republican convention in 1972, and by 1976, he wheeled himself in to make a speech just before Carter made his primary victory speech at the Democratic convention. Excellent movie, one of Oliver Stone's best, I think. think. And I'm fascinated by it because I'm like, well, what's taking him so long? And you see, there's keys if you know the history. He's got the book Johnny Got His Gun on the shelves. Johnny Got His Gun is an anti-war book that comes from decades before. It's horrible thing to read. Really well done, but I don't recommend it if you're like trying to enjoy a vacation.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's just
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with, but it's and All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930 movie. Great movie. That talks about how this. It's a story of the war from a German soldier's point of view and how he turned against the war. Went gung ho, but that happened during the war, and finds out when you start to have ambivalent feelings. It's one thing to have it after a war, but it's kind of deadly during the war. So it's just, but the so yeah. So you're right. That's one of them. Forms of trauma do. I have a cousin, he was raised a hippie. He's a Trumper right now, but he's been through different types of trauma and the rest. And I try to make deals with him. He keeps throwing a lot of videos at me that he wants me to watch, things by Matt Walsh and things like that. And I say, okay, all right, I'll watch 10 of yours if you'll watch one of mine. He says, I'm not watching any more propaganda. I was raised on the propaganda we were raised on. I'm not watching one more thing. And I see, like in the gym, not this one over here that I'm in now, but the one that closed down over off of Broadway. I was there one time on the cardio equipment, and somebody had CNN on, and this older guy walks in and yells, says, is anybody watching that? And somebody said, yeah, I was watching that. And he angrily just left the room because he didn't want to be contaminated or whatever. It's like, come on, if you're that afraid of being affected by ideas that are done, my view is you should constantly challenge your ideas. There's a line in the movie Contact. Did you ever see that?
Mm-mm.
Contact is a great movie.
It's an alien movie, right?
Well, sort of. Jodie Foster plays a radio telescope astronomer who's searching for life. The SETI, the ones that are listening for radio signals, and at a certain point they do hear signals. They receive a signal that's from others, and her line is when she gets back into where where her team is, she says, "Make me a liar." Which is basically, give me all the reasons why this is not what we are hoping it is. Shoot it down. That's what science is, right? If you've got a theory, you want to take every effort to shoot it down. You don't want to find confirmation bias. That's bad science. You want to shoot it down. So if you really believe in something, then put it through the worst test. If anything, it'll strengthen your belief in that system, or maybe you'll alter it, and then it'll be a stronger belief because you're taking into account certain things. Or maybe it turns out you shouldn't have believed that to begin with. And I've had some of those revelations, and just.
Well, the problem is what you just said is almost antithetical to how we run society today. That's why I feel like people aren't going to be switching sides as much anymore, is you have these rigid political divides, and all the media that you're consuming is along that divide. You're not seeing the other side. You're not getting the other input.
Which is so odd because it's at our fingertips. We can get any media we want, right? I mean, we can access it so easily. And I watch Fox News. I'll even listen to Matt Walsh. I have a low threshold for the ones that yell at me. I mean, that was the first thing I noticed with Fox News. It's like, okay, I'm sitting here in my living room. I can hear you. Why are you yelling at me, right? But then I noticed MSNBC started to do the same thing, and I'm like, okay, but it's I actually don't really like cable network opinion news that much anyway. First of all, can't stand the number of commercials they all have, but yeah, no, we ought to be doing it, and that's why I miss the old guard conservatives. Probably you're too young to remember him live, but William Buckley, he used to have Firing Line was a show where he would invite people that he disagreed with, and sometimes he'd get his butt kicked. He had Noam Chomsky on one time, totally got outclassed, but he'd like, okay, that happened, but most often he won just because of his wit, right? But he, as he got older, he realized, okay, just because I win an argument because I'm so clever with myself, even admitted that doesn't mean I'm right. Just because I've done more research and all that, I could run into somebody on the street and they could be right. Just because I can outsmart them and all I've done is shut them up, and what have I accomplished? He actually, started to say that. So he would have set up these debates where there would be like 4-on-4 of on a position, and sometimes he had where you had different people, like with the drug war, he had 2 conservatives and 2 liberals on each side. So you would have this, I can't remember the name of the liberal guy, it was a politician from New York, up against, again, my brain is going, but he was the head of the ACLU at the time, and the guy from Congress kept saying, so you agree with William Buckley, so you agree with William Buckley, blah, 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 so you agree with William Buckley, and he said, and finally he said, will you stop saying that? He says, hardly ever, so stop saying that. It was just, and Buckley cracked up. He's like sitting right there, but it just, I miss that. We don't have that anymore. CNN doesn't even have Crossfire anymore. That was
Well, now you just have panels of 5 people that agree with each other and just
Right.
parrot talking points.
Yeah, and we tried with Matt and David and I, we tried to see if we could get something like that locally, but it's really hard.
Is that because people don't want to have their ideas challenged?
I don't know. We had one person come who's kind of a moderate conservative, was a great guy, but I think he got pressure not to come back because you're giving validity to their airwaves.
You're platforming someone that shouldn't have a platform.
Exactly. And I'm like, it just, it was, the strangest thing, but I'd love to do it. I'm looking for, I would love it if there's anybody, who is willing to come on. And I've had conservatives on my show. I've had libertarians on my show. I love it. And I will never ambush anybody. I don't do that. And they all know that now. I've had Virginia Bass on my show. I've had Leo Lancey. I've had, a lot of different people on it. They know that I don't ambush them. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not there to win points. That's not, that's not productive either. I'm there to help to learn and help the audience learn from the instructor. We're there for an hour. I want everybody to learn from the interaction, and just trying to get people willing to do that. They're afraid because that's what most of the media is. Everything is about gotcha, and and embarrassing the other side, and what do you do when you accomplish that? Okay, so the other guy's embarrassed this time, they're not going to be embarrassed the next time. They'll be ready for you. It's just if and when they give you the opportunity. It's just, and I watched the style of debate, this gish galloping that Ben Shapiro does, and some of the leftists aren't that much better. What's his name? Keith Olbermann. He's overbearing. He's just as bad in terms of that as Rush Limbaugh was, more articulate in some ways, but it just, it doesn't do any good if you're just trying to afterwards have your side cheer and say, oh, he won that argument, and the other side either says, no, you didn't, or, well, you didn't prove anything, right? Okay, so yeah, you beat up our person, so what? It's just we don't have real discussion in this thing, and everything is so hypercharged. And one of the things I'm just not a real fan of. I'm as left as they come. I really am, but we are in a weird state these days. And I hate to even use the term. woke to describe it because it's what
You don't like that term?
well, it's what the right wing is using now, right? It's what they use to oversimplify anything. Anytime they want to say or politically correct. What people don't realize about the term politically correct, originally it was a term that was used during Mao's Cultural Revolution. If somebody on the Gang of Four or something like that said you're politically incorrect, you knew you were in trouble. You could get arrested for that, right? And so what happened was there were Maoists in the Students for a Democratic Society. It was a primary anti-war organization, and there was a couple Maoist groups trying to basically take it over. And there was always a fight against them for that. And the other groups would basically say, oh, gee, if you take over and I'm politically incorrect, are you going to have me executed too? I mean, there was that kind of thing. And so you had leftists using politically correct as a weapon against the sectarian extremists, right? Well, then these same people used it throughout the 70s in a self-deprecating way, saying, oh, maybe I'm too politically incorrect. Maybe I shouldn't reject that movie because it had certain things, because it does have a lot of saving graces, and kind of like the type of thing maybe we need now, to look at things like say, okay, maybe there's things about that movie that are dated, but maybe we can learn from it, something, or maybe there's other reasons. Anyway, people would say it was used in a self-deprecating manner, and there was a feminist conference where somebody actually said that. Unfortunately, sometimes the press doesn't really pay close attention to the nuances, and the media started to catch wind of it, and they started to think, treating it like it was an actual term that the left was using to say you're politically incorrect in earnest, right? And missing that it was a self-deprecating thing when it was said in America, or as an insult, within the intra-left battles. They didn't have that. And so then the right wing caught on it, and everybody started saying it. A whole show with Bill Maher was based on it. Oh, I'm not politically correct. Then it became the kind of thing where you can say something as racist or obnoxious as you want and say, preface it by saying, I guess I'm just not politically correct, and they come off as justified, of even heroic, for saying it.
Well, that's the extreme version, but isn't there some sense that being politically correct, yeah, you're not going to be killed for being politically incorrect, but you will be ostracized
Canceled.
from society. Yeah, which is a real thing. I get the air quotes.
It's a horrible thing. It's a real horrible thing, and I would have a hard time being on college campuses today.
But isn't that where that kind of stems from more so nowadays with politically correct? Is they're using that as a term to show if we don't mold ourselves to societal views right now, we're cast out from society.
Well, the left doesn't use it anymore.
No, the right.
Right,
the
right does. Yeah. Or they use woke in the same way. Woke began as just a African American slang for being awake, right? For being aware of your surroundings.
Is that true? I've heard that, but I didn't know if that was true or not.
Well, that's the legend anyway. I haven't researched it or anything.
I've never heard it in that context, but I've heard a few people say that's where it started.
That's what I've been told. I haven't researched to confirm it, but it's like such the common thing that I gotta say that's what, and it sounds like it, right? But I don't know, for sure. I mean, where else would it come from?
I don't know. Things come from weird places.
That's true too. Like Latinx.
That gets under my skin every time I hear that.
Yeah,
Nobody that I know that is Latino actually likes that term.
No, it did come from a Latino group, but a small group. It was a
small group born in America.
I don't know where they were born, but it was a group of trans Latino who came up with it at a conference, and then it started to kind of take off, and then some of the people who even started were like saying, I didn't realize it was going to take off like this, and the rest, but a lot of people are saying we don't even use X. I mean, at least use letters we use, right? But
you're breaking down culture.
Yeah.
For what purpose? Because it makes you feel uncomfortable? That seems
right.
Ridiculous.
And what are you doing? Why can't you just say trans Latino or something, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, or something along those lines, because I don't know that any other group has something that's trans specific like that. You know, I don't know that, black people, white people, any of them you do. Asians, are there, is there special words? So is there a reason? I don't know. Maybe they had a specific reason for doing that, but it's not my fight. But the point is that things do start and all of a sudden become that. And a lot of times you'll hear things like, somebody will say, it's not racism unless it's backed by the system. You can't call somebody a racist. Well, not only white people can be racist, but it's only racism if it's against people of color.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and the rest because the system is racist, and therefore the bigotry has to be systemic. You can be bigoted if and be of color against white people, but you can't be racist. And I'm like, I don't really care one way or another. I really don't. If it's fine, if we got different words, okay, you got two words for the same thing, appropriate and use it. But my question is who decided that? Is there some sort of committee somewhere? I mean, it was just,
It was probably some convention somewhere.
It might have been, it was a
kids.
type of thing. I remember in the 1980s, that's where they first started to say that. And one of the ideas was to call bigotry against white people racialism, as opposed to racism. And I thought that's just going to confuse a lot of people. And obviously did, because it didn't survive, right? So it's just, like I said, I don't really care one way or another, but if you're going to expect people to do things, you better be pretty clear, because when I ask people, so who did decide that, they don't seem to know. They just say, that's just the way it is. I'm like, no, I mean, unless you believe in God and God came and brought it down on a tablet or something, you got to have an explanation as to why that's the case and what that even means. What does it mean to be systemic? Right?
Does that bother you, though, as someone who identifies with the left, when you hear them go to these extremes of, you can't be racist against white people?
If I don't really care one way or another if you want to have a word that does, because I don't think bigot is any less stigmatizing than racist, quite frankly. I mean, back when I was a kid, we didn't even use the term racist. It was you're prejudiced. That was the word in the 70s. That was what I knew, right? You didn't even say sexist if a male man was being. It was you're chauvinist. That was the word. So words change, and sometimes meanings of words change, and I'm fine with it. I don't care. I just I can't keep track of when words change. That's the whole thing. So it's sort of like I want to know what the process is. I'd like to know who decides it and when, and until we know exactly how and why and who's making those decisions, ease up. I mean,
well, that's my problem. Is in reality, there's not a process. You have these. It's kids. It's always these kids that come out of, I don't know, these radical colleges or
some seminar that they attended.
Yeah, and they group together. And they just decide that this is the new thing, and now everybody has to adapt to this instantaneously. You don't get a second to try to evaluate how you feel on the issue. Yeah, you have to conform to that belief, or you're cast out.
Yeah, no, it's true. See, I think I've reached an age where I've only got so many fucks to give. So
that's what I hear from a lot of people, and that worries me, because if people take that attitude, then is there going to be anybody left to fight?
No, because I'm going to keep talking the way I am. I mean, I'm not going to directly hurt. So if somebody tells me you're hurting me by saying that, then I'm going to stop saying it. Fine. That's fine. Even if I think they're making it up, or trying up interpersonal power play, it's like, fine, whatever. Okay, I'll do it, right? But if they're like saying, well, we're going to kick you out of a forum, okay, fine. I'm not going to stay in the forum. And I've been kicked out of a couple of forums for some really stupid things on Facebook. It's like, all right, that's fine.
For views that you've expressed? No,
for saying things the wrong way, or actually not even for saying things the wrong way. This is where it gets really strange. There was a book written by Marge Piercy called Woman on the Edge of Time. And she proposed that there be non-gender pronouns, but her idea for it was per, which was short for person. And so when all this started coming up, I said, gee, I think it makes more sense. Marge Piercy's one makes more sense. And they were insulted by that. Well, you are telling, so and so people how they should say it. And I just said, no, I'm just saying, giving an opinion here. And because I would not revoke my opinion, I was kicked out of the group. I mean, that's, and I'm like, whatever. That's what I mean by I have no fucks to give. I mean, it's just like, you're going to do that? Fine. It's just, but I'm not in a position as an academic, where I'm at stake. My professional position is not at risk. I can afford to do it. Other people, I mean, comedians are afraid to go onto college campuses.
That's my biggest fear, is the people that are at stake. Right. Educators that do have their jobs on the line, people that work in media that have their positions threatened for views.
Yeah. And anybody who's trying to, God forbid, teach creative thinking.
That's not happening.
No, I mean, that's just, it is actually happening. It's, we tend to think that it's not happening, but actually I've talked to people whose professors do challenge them, and it happens. And every once in a while a student will get up and leave because they're insulted, and they'll file a complaint. And we hear about the most extreme situations, and we hear about the spineless administrations, but most administrations will like to hear the complaint, get the complaint, say, yeah, whatever, so we hear about the more extreme situations where, Ann Coulter's, there's violence outside because she shows up, it's just like, but most places, the other places, they'll be, smart enough to realize, do you realize not only are you being, quasi-fascist by doing that, but you're playing straight into her ego and what she wants, and that she's going to fundraise off of this? I mean, it's just like, it's just total self-defeating on every level, and she's not even the worst one that comes here. Some of the worst ones are the people you don't even know about, I mean, it's just, but you don't, you don't end debate by shutting them down. Quite frankly, I want to know that they're there, because then people will start showing up in clandestine, and you don't get to have a discussion about it, and you can't challenge them. And then the people just go to their own websites. That's the problem. That's part of the problem. Everybody's got their segregated, websites, and the right's not any better. I was on a site, again, giving my explanation as to why I actually oppose certain forms of gun control. Right, I don't care about the guns. I don't believe that it's a deterrent to a fascist government or anything like that, because quite frankly, all of us having our shotguns and even our AK-47s are not going to be a match for an organized military unless we're trained and know how to do it. And a guerrilla warfare in the United States would not be fought with those. It would probably use, kind of like in Iraq, improvised explosive devices and assassinations, under in much like, more like the Battle of Algiers than anything else. But I don't know if you've ever seen that. Strongly recommend that movie. But I agree. I don't think we should have a blanket, ban of handguns, that requires blah, blah, blah. It didn't matter, because I didn't agree for the right reason. They were all over me for it, and I'm just like, they want that because they've got their gospel. You got to believe for the right reason, just like it doesn't matter that you voted with Trump all these times. You buck him once
and you're good.
Welcome
to the club.
Yeah.
Come over to our side.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, so yeah, at any rate, I mean, it is a real problem. And and I think and to a certain degree, some of what we're talking about here, and like I said, I hate to use the term wokeism, because once the right wing grabs it, it's like, I want to come up with something else to call it, and I haven't really come up with it yet. But to a limited degree, that is what part of what gave us Trump. It's not the only thing. But it is.
I do want to talk about that, but I have to ask, when do you think the violence aspect really came into play for the left, because you always heard about that with the right. These
Mm-hmm.
far-right extremist groups were always a little violent, but it wasn't attached to the left like it is now. The left used to be the proponent of free speech. They used to encourage debate. You had the ACLU say that, Nazi groups should be allowed to march.
Yeah, but
because
they were not. They lost a lot of favor with the left even back then.
yeah, but that was an important fight.
It was,
And
yeah.
they acknowledged at the time that you have to let groups you disagree
Right.
with speak, or you lose the right to speak. We've lost that today.
Yeah.
Now it's you have to say the right speech, or you don't get the right to speak.
Well, the ACLU actually are still proud of that position. They still fundraise, and they lost a lot of support over that position on the left even then. You could argue that the left was actually even more violent at that time. What happened in Chicago, and yes, I primarily blame the Chicago cops and the Mayor Daley machine. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see the trial of the Chicago 7 yet.
No, I don't know what happened in Chicago.
Oh, okay. Well, Chicago was the Chicago Democratic Convention, and different groups were coming there to protest because LBJ was going to be there and to protest the war. And because it was a Democratic president that was leading the war, and Chicago's a place to organize. Well, Mayor Daley, who was a Democrat but very kind of conservative in a lot of ways, said no demonstrations, would not grant and permits for any demonstrations, would not grant, and was saying, you show up, we're going to arrest you. Well, tens of thousands of people, young people, showed up anyway, and they showed up with the cops, and it was a bloodbath. And so the next year, the Nixon became president, and Mitchell, if you study, you'll hear about him. He ended up in jail over Watergate, but he was the attorney general. Wanted federal charges filed against 8 of the organizers. It was down to 7 once Bobby Seale was separated from the trial. He shouldn't have been part of it anyway because he really wasn't in it. But as they point out in the movie, they wanted a scary black guy in there to scare the jury. He was one of the Black Panthers, and that's the other thing, is that was the Black Panthers and other groups represented a kind of a violent break from the Martin Luther King crowd. I mean, there was a lot going on back then, so there were violent advocates of the left and the Weathermen, and we'll talk about that. But what was happening in Chicago was they weren't necessarily advocating that it turned violent, but they said, we're going to come here. Tom Hayden, Abby Hoffman, the Jerry Rubin are all very famous organizers of the time of the left, and they came from very different parts of the left. But they were all organizing their groups and coming there. And so when this horrible thing happened, luckily nobody was killed. A lot of people really badly injured, a lot of officers and everything just poured all over Chicago. Just the streets.
Was it violence amongst the protesters or against the police?
Between the police and the protesters, and also some counter demonstrators and the protesters, but it was mostly the police and the kids that were protesting got so angry that some of them actually got into the one of the halls of the convention, Democratic Convention, and it was just chaos. I mean, it was absolute chaos. But the police were not granted. Anytime they showed up for a group in the park, to do what should have been a lawful protest, police were all over them with batons, breaking heads open. I mean, it was really bad. This was where Buckley was not at his best, and he was in a debate with Gore Vidal, and you can find this on YouTube too, where Buckley is like saying, "Well, I believe that the police actions were justified," and Gore Vidal says, "Well, I expect you to say that because you're basically a crypto Nazi," and then Buckley says, "You say that again, I'll sock you, and you'll blah blah blah," and it just kind of broke down. This was not a good time, and then Buckley threatened to sue and everything, and all this became, and then Gore Vidal's apology wasn't really an apology. He said, "Oh, yeah, that just kind of came out of my mouth. I only meant to say crypto fascist," So anyway, it was just, I mean, this was the time. This was, so, we think it's bad now, but it was at the time. And there were a lot of people who were saying, look, every time we try to have a peaceful demonstration or a peaceful anything, our leaders get killed. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all these people, and we get beaten up. and some, and the rest. So they started to become violent. The Weathermen actually organized an underground group. They were small, but they started blowing up bombs. They always warned people. They never killed anybody. Except accidentally 3 of their own when a bomb went off in the house. But they would always give like a half-hour warning and say everybody better leave that building because but it was violent.
And they were actually putting bombs out there. They just
they were blowing up buildings and the like and Hoover got pissed and could never catch up with them.
So maybe I'm wrong then. Is it more violent now, or is
I don't
it just
think
a
it is.
different
I think
form?
what you see is more spontaneous violence, but I don't think you'd see the organized violence like you used to. I mean, that was back then. You had the Symbionese Liberation Army. I mean, people were actually advocating a violent overthrow of the system.
Well, you have Antifa now that basically,
Yeah.
I mean, they're not as organized as other groups, but they
punch a Nazi kind of
but their whole thing is we need to burn society down so we can build it back up more equitably.
Some of them say that. Others just say we need to punch Nazis and scare them back out of the place. But yeah, and there was that element too then of that, and that's not healthy. And some of it is just a street reaction when you have young black men killed. It's not anything new. Going all the way back to Watts and the others, you tend to have riots. This is what happens. It's not like and when Martin Luther King, a lot of the people who back the violence will quote him as saying a riot is the voice of the unheard. He wasn't trying to justify it. He was talking cause and effect. He said, when you do this and they're not unheard, this happens, right? He was not in any way. He was an advocate of nonviolence, but he was trying to explain to American leadership, this is what happens when you kill people and there is no justice from it.
Well, you had Chris Cuomo on CNN say, show me where it says protests have to be peaceful on live national news saying that.
Yeah. I mean, right.
How crazy is that?
It's inflammatory, except that I don't think very many people in Antifa are listening to Cuomo. But still,
no, but just to say that on national news on a network like CNN, which at the time you could make the argument it was more respectable.
And it's a pandering, obviously, to people.
That's all they do now.
Yeah, right.
And the same can be said for Fox News.
Sure. It was, and to a certain crowd and the rest. And, there's a lot of anger out there. I don't think it's actually more violent now, though. I think it's actually less violent. I think you got this element and the rest. And you do have ideology justifying it, but it was a little more scary back then. I was a little bit young. I came in on the tail end of it. I was 4 years old when King was shot, and I didn't know much about what was happening with the Weathermen. I was in grade school at the time, but I did know about the SLA. That was the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. You may have heard of that a little bit. That was the Hearst daughter, the newspaper magnate, and she actually...
Randolph Hearst.
Yeah, Randolph Hearst. It was his
William
granddaughter.
Randolph Hearst,
his granddaughter was captured. She suffered from Stockholm syndrome. Actually participated in bank robbery, and and then they were all, a bunch of them were killed by the LAPD. Set the house on fire and shot them as they were leaving. It's really a horrific situation. But they were called the Symbionese Liberation Army. I don't even remember what Symbionese means. But it was, you had a lot of this going on back then.
So do you think that this violence is just an effect of people feeling oppressed, whether it's warranted or not, and it just takes that form?
I think the spontaneous riots happen that way. I think that those are when people go out there and start.
But what about these movements where, especially on college campuses, where
I think it starts that way. I think it's a cynicism that gets born of things not changing fast enough for them, and back then, like I said, there was one death after another. I mean, people were just being shot and killed and dying. There were labor leaders and people I haven't even mentioned yet. Medgar Evers, three of the civil rights workers were found murdered by basically a Klan death squad, and the rest. And there was so much people, they were starting to get tired of, I'm tired of turning the whole idea of turning the cheek. I want to start shooting back, and it was just, and when you're young, especially, and a little bit maybe not quite as patient and not realizing how slow change really is, how agonizingly slow it can be. Yeah,
That's a big part.
yeah.
That wanting to turn the ship faster than it's turning.
Then it's turning, and
But why college campuses? Those used to be, I don't want to say sanctuaries of thought, but you could have free thought there and open debate. Those were really the best frontier speech had.
and that was what they fought for.
And
The
but
free
now
speech movement.
it's so far gone. It's so far down the rabbit hole.
I want to say that that's been overhyped a bit, because I was saying that too, and then I had friends of mine say, "No, come and check this out." And,
Well, I've gone to like 3 or 4 different schools, and I can
Yeah.
say that it is definitely more prevalent than most people expect.
But
it to
I've
be.
actually been in some classrooms where I've seen the exchanges, and there are exchanges between conservatives and liberals and the rest. It's that way in schools, but they are afraid to, outside the classroom in a public manner, have the debates. But in the classrooms, a lot of the debates are still happening, and yeah, they turn in the teachers every once in a while. They get angry because teachers said something the wrong way, and in most cases, as I said, the administrators will like say, yeah, grow up. But
you do have those
but
cases where it
sometimes
doesn't
the
happen that way.
administrators are like, well, I got my job too. I got a family to feed, and I don't want all this kind of pressure from the community and blah blah blah. So it just yeah. So there is that, but most of the time it's not. But I think it's overstated. But that's not to say that it's not a serious effing problem and needs to be addressed, and the left needs to take a real strong look at itself, a real powerful look at itself, because it was bad when I was going to college in the 1980s. I mean, I remember an incident that happened. I attended UC Santa Cruz, and we have different colleges there, and there was this trend called breakdancing. You familiar with that?
Yeah, breakdancing.
Breakdancing. Yes,
Yeah.
it's still okay.
Yeah, it's still popular.
All right. Well,
I believe
it was okay. Well, it was there was a demonstration came to the campus to do that, and there was a guy who was concerned about. It was actually trying to make a point about the way it was presented about the racism that he saw in it. So he did this satire, and it was written from the point of what's the name of the author? Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling. He wrote a lot of novels as basically a white person in the colony as a colonialist in India and other parts of the British colonies, and he would write things. Brilliant writer, but write things from a very colonialist point of view, and famous for children's books like Rikki Tikki Tavi and I think The Jungle Book, that type of thing. I mean, good stories, but definitely kind of a view of everything's in its place with maybe white people coming across as being more intelligent than other people in his books, not intentionally, but that's the way it was. So he would, and his writing is known for being that. So this guy wrote about the breakdance in the style of Rudyard Kipling in his view, and this was maybe a little too subtle. Because he was talking about these strapping young bucks showing their wares and blah blah blah, and it was reported that they were given a warm meal and a copy of the school catalog, which has lots of nice bright pictures in it. Right? Okay, pretty raw stuff there, but there were so many students that thought it was for real. They didn't understand that was satire. One of them even wrote, this was a graduate student, run and said, yeah, this Rudyard Kipling needs to be, because he signed it as his byline, Rudyard Kipling, needs to be disciplined. I'm like, you're a grad student? You don't know who Rudyard Kipling is? Really? I mean, it was just, and it was, and you're going to write that? And he was really sorry he did it, and it was over the top. But
that's what satire is supposed to be.
That's what satire is supposed to be. And he was trying to make a point against racism, and here he gets in trouble as a racist, right?
You had I believe it was the Babylon Bee recently was suspended on Twitter for a joke that they made.
I'm not familiar with that.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the other one is Joe Rogan. I don't think he's racist. I heard some of this stuff. I enjoy some of his stuff. I agree with him maybe 40% of the time, just and the rest. And yeah, he likes to do the shock stuff, but I don't know that I don't I think he's got to has a raw deal. I mean, it's not affecting him anyway, but it's just so I think there's a lot. I haven't watched what's the name of the black comedian who they
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle. Yeah, I haven't watched that yet. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to. I will.
It's just outrage.
I
mean, his joke in that one that really came after him, it was he was talking about his friend who was trans and was basically bullied to death, and he's talking about her or him. I don't know. And that's the story intertwined in his jokes, and they just eviscerated him for it.
I have it on my queue just because anything that's going to be censored, I'm going to watch. That's that was the same reason I went to see the Passion of Christ. When you had Christians protesting outside the theater, I wouldn't have bothered to go see it otherwise. I mean, it was
you had to check it out.
I had to check it out, and I was like, and then I'm watching it, and I was kind of bored. I'm like, I would think they would like this, right? It was very much, it was Willem Dafoe playing Christ way back when. It was kind of silly, I thought. It was, but it was, and I could see where they went because it has him actually in his dream sleeping with Mary Magdalene, right? But it wasn't real. It was just a dream, right? But I guess in their theology that's really bad. But because you're not supposed to be tempted if you're Christ, I guess. But but to me, that was the whole point of it. He was a human being, right? Well, isn't the whole point that he conquered temptation with all the same things to show us how it's done? I would think that they would have liked that, but it was just too subtle for them. Again, so they were out there protesting. Like I said, I never would have bothered with it. If they weren't out there protesting,
the outrage drives you toward it,
right? And I as bad as it was, I think the graphic novel Mouse benefited from that being banned in the school district back east. Have you ever read that? It's a graphic novel.
It's called Mouse?
Called Mouse, Maus. It's German for mouse, and it's about the Holocaust in which Jews are depicted as mice, the Nazis as cats. And it's the Germans as cats, and and it's very powerful and very instructive, and presented in a way that teenagers can really come to understand. It sounds silly, but it's not. It's really well done. And Art Spiegelman, the author, came out. They banned it because a couple of the mice were naked at one point. So porn, right? I mean, the dumbest thing in the world. It's a drawing, but he started to sell. All of a sudden, it drew attention to it. So it's I strongly recommend it. I mean,
I'll have to check that out. Where do you think this goes though with free speech and censorship?
I think we go in like you asked the question about violence. I think we go in waves, and I think I think there will be a reaction to this. I think that there is a younger generation, beyond the millennials and the Gen Zs even, that are looking at this and thinking that it's going too far. I'm looking at my own son and daughter, for instance. I mean, they were raised in, with me. I don't impose anything on them. In fact, my son likes to joke that he's going to vote for Trump, even, right? I mean, he likes to debate it, but but then I hear him talking with his friends, and and he's not, and the rest. But I think there is a generation that's going to react to it and say, yeah, that no, I think that they're going to slow down and say, okay, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some good points are raised here, but that's off the scale. I mean, that's what happens. A generation takes it a little too far. The 1980s generation of protests, I think, was much more effective in some ways than the 60s because it didn't go crazy. And when police started to go crazy, the backlash was against the police because they were unprovoked, and they stopped by the mid 1980s. In San Francisco, there was all of a sudden a big citizens committee about the police that were starting stuff up because, for one thing, the 60s generation were older and could instruct them, said, yeah, don't learn from our mistakes, and the rest. But it was, so I think you get generations coming in that learn, and then maybe sometimes it has to be relearned. But I think the next generation of the left is going to come up and say, yeah, I like that, I don't like that. And
I agree with you in the sense that it is a pendulum swing, right?
Mhm.
But do you think there's a possibility of it ever reaching a point where that pendulum breaks off?
I
That
hope
you
not.
go too far one side and it just...
I hope not. I don't think so. I think
Because that's my fear with... The game changer is technology, and I don't
Mhm.
think people truly grasp the ability to censor thought on those platforms, because most people aren't being censored, right? So they
Right,
hear those stories of people getting kicked off these platforms, and they're like, well,
right.
it doesn't matter. It's not affecting me. It's not affecting somebody I know. So why should I care? But those are how people communicate nowadays. Those platforms.
Yeah, but you still got to show up at the wedding and in the funeral and the family gathering and the rest. I've got family members who are conservatives, and we avoid politics for the first hour, and then people start drinking, we start arguing again, and it's always pretty respectful, and I'm actually kind of encouraged because some of the more conservative members of my family, I think, have had their fill of Trump. They're still going to be conservative, and that's fine. It's a perspective. It's a cultural perspective. I think that see, part of the problem. I think part of it is technology, but I also think part of the problem is we're so alienated from each other these days. I mean, I go back to Simon and Garfunkel's song "The Sound of Silence" with a very and maybe the Disturbed's even more kind of intense version of it. Is that
Great song.
Yeah, it is. Is that we are wanting to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We always do. That's what draws a lot of us to politics, to religion, to a lot of different things like that. And so once we fit into our group, we want to stay in that group, and we don't want to give it up, right? So so we don't want to be canceled, right? That type of things, and it's really hard. I haven't even gotten into this yet, but when I was 16, I joined a sectarian Trotskyist group called the Socialist Workers Party, and it had all the answers for me. By the time I was a senior, I was done with it. But it had, for a few months there, it had all the answers for me. Plus, it was a very attractive young woman. But that's a whole other aspect to it.
There's always a woman.
Yeah, but it was yeah. But I wasn't legal yet. She, it's just. But still, it was. But the wanting to belong, and so I think part of it is that our politics are so culturally identified, that we're part of this. There's two nations, we say, right? We're part of this group, part of this tribe, part of this clan, and we identify ourselves that way. And that's the problem: is if we identify ourselves, our ideas, we shouldn't identify ourselves by our ideas. We should identify ourselves by our ability to discuss the ideas, by the discussion itself. That's what the experiment is about. Is the American experiment and the whole experiment of democracy that is basically being experimented by about 180 countries now, to some degree or another, around the world, is about the discussion. That's what it's about. And if it's not about the discussion, then yeah, we're going to be like one of the other 30 countries. I mean, and that would be real scary with a country this as powerful as the United States.
It worries me. And I feel like, and again, I don't know if this is just a misinterpretation because of my age, and I haven't been around to see enough of it yet, but I feel as though people are unified in these groups under a common theme of we are oppressed, and so we're coming together. Rather than we're coming together to try to achieve something better and make something happen, it's I'm being oppressed. Oh, you're also being oppressed.
Grievance politics.
Yeah, let's get together.
Yeah.
It seems and those bonds are almost stronger. Or not stronger, but they're almost more... They've got a little more zest behind them because you feel like you have this moral injustice that is being
Yeah.
perpetrated.
Perpetrated.
Wow, that was a rough word.
Yeah.
Perpetrated against you, and so you have to do something against that.
You know, and sometimes it's even true depending on the group, right? You know, I don't want to even sell that short, or depending on the situation. I mean, you know, that's there, but but then it gets carried on to, you know, you might as well be the Sharks and the Jets, right? I mean, it's because you're not doing anything
It's
else.
not real.
Yeah, it's just or if it's or if it's like team building is my partner on Redwood Wonk likes to refer to it. Dave is, you know, you're team building. You're part of a team, and rather than, you know, I or there's that line. Have you ever? I keep asking you if you've seen things that are like probably before your time, but
I'm gonna have to go back through and write them all down so I can watch them.
Have you ever seen 12 Angry Men?
No.
Okay, that is, I think, a movie that everybody who wants to talk about, to think in terms of creative thinking and dialogue should watch. It's a jury. The whole movie is in one jury room. It's not single take. They do break it up, but it's very well done. It's filmed in the 1950s. You have to, you know, basically suspend disbelief because it's, you know, here you are in what's obviously New York City, and somehow even back then it would have been impossible that 12 white men be juries, statistically just impossible. But it happens, right? So you just suspend disbelief because it's about the dynamics of what 12 angry white men would be doing, judging whether or not this young man committed murder, and the rest. And there were some things that were probably should have been a mistrial. You know, guy brings his own evidence into the room, shouldn't have done that. You know, certain things like that. And I actually have certain questions about their logic. At a certain point, I actually think, well, if that's true, the kid probably was guilty. But you know, but you can see where it goes. It's everybody at first, except for Henry Fonda, says guilty, and gradually, as they start to go through the exercise, it's like, well, do you understand reasonable doubt? And you know, it's not, but it's the exercise of the discussion, of the of the thinking process of, well, maybe I'm not that sure. And I think if there was a good preface to the movie, Bertrand Russell, philosopher or peace organizer, was part of the original peace movement where the origin of the peace sign, which was the first anti-nuclear movement in the early 60s. He was one of the 3 big organizers. He said part of the problem in this world is that the stupid or the intelligent always have doubt, and the stupid are always cocksure. You know, it's just, you know, that's a problem. And so in this movie, you've got all the people who are like, you know, not quite sure. That the thinkers are letting themselves get pushed around by the people who definitely know this kid is guilty. And then, you know, but gradually, as they start thinking, yeah, no, wait a minute, no, you know, they start to push back, and they become firm. And the one little guy who's probably the least quote unquote masculine in terms of his voice and his body and everything ends up pushing back the hardest. No, you can't send a man to chair on that evidence. Give me a break. You know, it's really interesting how it develops. I strongly recommend that. It should be mandatory. You know how they do these reaction videos on YouTube? Yeah. Well, it's starting to make the rounds on that, and younger people are like saying, "Oh, I don't know if I want to watch a black and white movie," and they watch it. Wow, that's amazing! You know what?
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's 12 Angry Men used to be when we had civics classes in high school. You'd watch it to see how a jury works. It's not. You can't bring in your own. Well, you'll see it.
Your own evidence, yeah.
Yeah, it's just you know, but you know, and a few other things too. But just, you know, forget about that and forget about the actual thing. I think they should have written it differently a little bit, and they could have made it so that there really should be more doubt. But there are a couple things in there that say, wait a minute, come on, that is a real chance and the rest. But they also want to set it up for their filming, the big confrontation between E.G. Marshall and Henry Fonda. They had to have it with the pieces of evidence. So I mean, it just wouldn't have been the same film without it. So they had to do that. But it just and we need movies like that. They've done a couple of remakes, just not as powerful of it. I think people need to go back to the original one. It's also just where they really started to develop the whole concept of doing closing in close-ups on people and pulling out, and where they stick on somebody's face even after they stop speaking and somebody else starts, to really emphasize that person's feeling. I mean, all kinds of little things
cinematic
effects that we take for granted now, that were just sort of still being developed back then as film was really evolving. And anyway, but I bring that up because I think about, how do we change minds? How does somebody change a mind? I was raised to do that. When I went to the Socialist Workers' Party meetings, my parents were like, "Oh God, why are you going to that group?" When they were organizing against the war in the '60s, and they saw this group as being disruptive, and it was like dealing with the Moonies. They said, blah blah blah, but they didn't stop me. They wanted me to figure it out for myself.
Walk me through this, because your grandfather was a communist,
yes,
right?
Yes.
How does that happen?
All right, my grandfather came from Denmark. He was a writer. There are a number of communists in Denmark. Most of my family in Denmark were either communists or religious fanatics, Christian fanatics. I mean, it just was that way. And one of them, if you look up, Hans Kirk, was actually one of the more famous novelists of Denmark for the 20th century. Wrote The Fisherman, really interesting book. And they were part of the backbone of the underground during the war. A lot of stories about it. He was actually captured or escaped. They burned his books. The Germans did during the occupation. But the fishing part of my family, their fishing boats were used to transport Jews and other people over to Sweden, and the rest. So this. The Communist Party was the backbone. That's why they have some popularity in politics in Europe to this day. They were the backbone of the underground movements in France, Italy, and in Denmark. And so, but my grandfather came over earlier, and he hooked up with people here. It was in the party. Back then it wasn't quite as big a stigma. He joined the military and took part in the invasion of Italy during the war.
Is this World War One?
World War II. Italy was actually on the Allied side in World War One, but Axis in World War II. Meanwhile, he married my step grandmother, he married my blood grandmother, divorced her, married my step grandmother, who had been a nurse in what's called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I don't know if you've heard of what happened in Spain, but this was the precursor to the war. A lot of people say Franco, a left coalition government was elected circa 1934. Think maybe 35, was there a rebellion in the military led by General Franco came up. Part of the military sided with the Republicans, as they were called, and there was the Spanish Civil War, and Germany and Italy were backing Franco, but nobody on the West was backing Spain because they had ties to Stalin, the communists, some of them. And although the Soviet Union did provide some help, it just wasn't anything compared to that. Anyway, so international brigades went in. They became known as the International Brigades, and the American contingent became known as the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. My grandmother was a nurse, served as a nurse in that brigade, actually met Hemingway, thought he was pompous asshole, but anyways, which shouldn't surprise anybody who has read him. But so when he met her, they all fell into this communist grouping. So they were and during the McCarthy era, you're familiar with McCarthyism in the 50s and
A
all of
little
that.
bit.
Yeah, well, that was the backlash during the Cold War, after the war, in which McCarthy held up, I have a list of 200 plus spies in the State Department, but it really wasn't about spies in the State Department. It was about going after Hollywood, the Reds in Hollywood, about the unions and the rest. And the FBI was just everywhere trying to root out anybody who was communist. They even came and took my grandfather and my father and uncle's passports away. At one point, he was already a citizen. Back then, if you served in the military, you get your citizenship, so they couldn't deport him or anything like that. But even though he got here illegally, he came into San Francisco. He got a job. I
Came into Ellis Island there?
No, he was when his family. He was going to school. He wanted to be a writer like his first cousin, Hans Kirk, and but when the Depression happened and the market collapsed, his family ran out of money. He didn't want to go back to the farm, so he got a job on a ship, some type of liner, and came to San Francisco, loved it, didn't get back on the ship. So basically jumped ship. And
Smart idea. And so the FBI took his passport.
Well, he actually became a citizen long before that happened. He served in the military, joined the military as an illegal alien, right? And they didn't stop him. And because he served in the military back then, that made it easy for you to get your citizenship. And so he had it. But during the McCarthy era, because he had been in the Communist Party during the 30s and 40s, his passport and his two sons were taken away, and the rest. So we have this story. My dad was later in what's called the New Left. The communist left and the old socialist left are considered the old left. The 60s, what broke out, was considered the New Left. They were considered, a little bit less ideologically rigid and more geared towards cultural resistance as well as economic and the rest. And they took on different issues. For instance, one of the things that they argued about, my grandfather died literally when my mother was pregnant with me. He was a drinker. It was liver failure. And he told my dad, ecology is a bourgeois science. I mean, if he was around during the whole logging wars thing here, he wouldn't have been a fan of Hurwitz and Pacific Lumber. He would say that, they were corrupt and bosses and they need to be, overturned and the rest. But he would say, but what about the jobs? He would be right with, the people there. So there was that difference. I mean, between that. And so, what I'm sort of getting at is then, so I was raised in that, but but he rolls his eyes at that, kind of like a lot of people who are raised in the Catholic Church. By the time they go to college, aren't Catholic anymore. They kind of respect the morality of their families and the rest and what they're raised with, but they don't want to be Catholic by the time they're done with college, right? Well, he's the same way with the Communist Party, was much more interested in participating in anti-war demonstrations, listening to Bob Dylan, getting stoned, right? This is the new left and the rest. And so I'm kind of raised on the tail end of that. And by the time I'm 16, I'm revisiting the old left. Right, except as a Trotskyist, and my parents are looking at me saying, "Why do you want to do that?" It's just and the rest. And so, but they didn't stop me. They wanted me to learn on my own. They wanted me to draw my own conclusions. I'm 16 years old attending these meetings, and of course they were relentless. There would be my dad, and my uncle. So, Eric. Does your group of, how many people do you have nationwide? I'd say, a little over 2,000. They're the vanguard that's going to lead the country to revolution someday, And I'm like, I said, well, that's what they say.
Was that one of the principles of Trotsky Socialism, was revolution?
Trotsky was an offshoot of Leninism that believed that you had to organize the socialism like in a quasi-military fashion. that you would run people for office and do everything the democratic way, but you understood that one day that the ruling class wasn't going to allow it to happen, that they would stop and they would establish they would declare fascism, the Iron Heel, as Jack London wrote about, and at that point you'd have to be ready to overthrow them, just as Lenin did in 1917, and the rest. And so they believed that that was going to happen, but it was kind of like, the second coming of Christ. It was always something that was in some theoretical future.
It was preemptive of that fascist strike.
Yeah, right. It was just they didn't think it was ever going to happen. They never planned for it or anything like that. It was just something they believed was going to happen in some distant future. So that's why when they were asked, do you advocate the overthrow of the United States government, you had some communist people saying that's a complicated question. You had some of the authors like, you don't understand even the question you're asking. It's like, no, I don't now, but when it becomes like Hitler's regime, yes, right? So it's, but that was too nuanced for McCarthy, right? He didn't care. He just wanted the answers he was looking for. So, it's just, so yes, they did believe it was going to happen, but they didn't believe in trying to make it happen. You had to wait for the what was it called? The optimal conditions or the manifest conditions. I can't remember, but there's some terms of that for revolution. Until then, you just worked within the system.
And was the New Left portion of the Communism Party, was that?
They weren't in the Communist Party.
They weren't.
They knew, well, a few of them were. Angela Davis was, but no, the New Left was a break from that whole thing.
Okay.
The New Left was a break from, they believed in revolution, but they believed in revolution every day. There wasn't going to be one big
thing,
orgasmic revolution. You resisted every day. It was, you had the counterculture. So you were, you had the hippies that were coming up with new music, with new poetry, with new ways of living, new varieties. You had the Back the Land movement. You had all this kind of a thing, and you brought in different issues. It wasn't just the working class versus the ruling class. They were more into some of the theories about race than the communists had been. Although the communists were very much oriented towards dealing with racism in a particular level. I don't want to say that they didn't believe there was racism or that it wasn't a fundamental issue, but the whole concept of woke probably is more New Left than it is Old Left, and the rest of the Old Left believed that it was primarily the struggle between rich and poor. Whereas, which is kind of where Bernie comes from, for instance, right?
He calls himself a democratic socialist?
A democratic socialist, and in some ways he's like a blend of New Left and Old Left. He's and he got torn for it. I don't know if you remember the incident during one of his campaign where the two African American women got onto the stage and basically filibustered, took over, and they say, you're an economic reductionist, Bernie, which is to basically say that, you believe it's all about rich and poor when it's more, we have to deal with the issues between black and white before we can get to rich and poor. Whereas, Bernie's like saying, if you take care of rich and poor, all the other issues will resolve, right? Or they all have to be resolved at once, kind of a thing. So you're getting into a really complicated, nuanced things, and I'm oversimplifying everything because there's a lot of different theories about
nuanced.
Right, you got and the rest, and then you had the women's movement come out of it. The personal is political, and the rest. My mother remembers an incident when my parents were actually the beginning of the anti-war movement in San Francisco. They organized the first group in Noe Valley that put out the first one. There was another one over in Haight-Ashbury, but they organized one in Noe Valley, put out the first leaflet. My dad and my uncle, they were a little bit older than a lot of the college students then. They were working as carpenters over in Berkeley, and they got invited to a teach-in after they were done working. They were constructing some building on the campus, and so they decided to come and say, you know what, we're going to try to organize there. So they organized. They got a group of about 15 people, and they were organizing. And all of a sudden, it just took off. It became what would later form into the Peace and Freedom Party, which is still on the ballot these days. Much different than what it was, but but my mother remembers this time when the movement was pretty big, and they were in this house, and it was, and there were probably about 20 people at this meeting, and all of a sudden, one of the men says, "Okay, we'd like the ladies to leave the room because the men have something really important to talk about." And all of the women got up and left the room. They went into the kitchen until one of them finally said, "What are we doing?" Because they were so patterned into it, and this was the type of thing happening in the movie, in the movement across the thing. This was one of the, it was probably simultaneously happening across the country, and they all went back in the living room and said, "You can all leave if you want," and they're like, "Oh no, I'm not sexist. We wanted to blah blah blah." It's like, no, you asked us to leave, and these things started happening. They were starting to say, "Yeah, we have to transform ourselves. It's not just about transforming the system. We also have to transform ourselves." So that's the beginning of what maybe has kind of gone too far, but there has to be personal transformation as well as systemic transformation. And the same things were happening with race, where probably there were incidents where people were of color felt like, you know what, you didn't include us in that, or you're kind of telling us how to think or something like that, that maybe has gotten again too far, but started off and still in real, real situations that are for real, and still there are dynamics that have to be addressed. And my concern is, yeah, we need to dial it back down again, but we also can't lose track of the fact that we still do have pattern behaviors that we need to address and do it. We got to figure out a way to do that without, again, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between new left and old left.
And so how did you get involved in the socialist movement from that?
Oh, me? Well, the Socialist Workers' Party, I decided, even though my family was into it,
Did your parents go socialist too, or did they stay communist?
My parents, my mother was raised Catholic and military family, so she never was. My father never really liked the Communist Party. He always thought it was kind of religious in his view. He saw it as a religion, like a church. They always more considered themselves more socialist, but they just weren't into the dogma of it. They thought, yeah, we need to have a more cooperative society, one that isn't everybody fending for themselves. We need to have things that do that. But you know what? As he tried to point out to a socialist who freaked out when he pointed it out, the first 5 pages of the Communist Manifesto contain nothing but praise for capitalism. I challenge anybody read it. It does. It goes through all the ways that capitalism is not just a force for economic efficiency, but progress and the rest. And it's possible that if he'd looked at what became the Soviet Union, that he would have said, before you can even talk about socialism, you need some capitalism there to develop the means by which socialism can even be possible. That's that. In fact, some of the socialists were saying that. They all got killed later, the ones who were saying that. But still, it was just So he's like, saying, and it was, I can't remember how old I was. I took interest in socialism not from reading Marx or any of them.
Because of a girl.
No, that was later. No,
later.
it was from reading Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Science fiction was
he a socialist?
Yes, he was, but he
Okay.
didn't call himself that. He wrote a book about a utopian society that was based on trying to apply principles of science to organizing a society. It got disguised that, so it survived through the McCarthy era without being called socialist, because sometimes censors are kind of dumb and can't pick up on things if you don't lay it out. But I read it. I'm like, yeah, I like that. And then I said, I guess that means I'm a socialist. So I decided I wanted to advocate it. So I looked up socialist in the phone book, and the Socialist Workers' Party was there. Not the right group. I really should have been involved. There are other groups that are, less religious and more democratic oriented. Democratic Socialists of America. I don't like the direction they're taking lately, but that type of organization. But that's so but again, you talk about socialism versus capitalism. When you really think about it, neither one can exist without the other. I mean, You look at a fire hydrant that's publicly owned. That's socialism, right? But,
Well, the fire departments,
a
right?
fire department,
Police
the
department.
roads, anything, the schools, everything. That's a form of socialism. Even if you limit it to the Marxist view of, well, the means of production. Well, roads are a means of production, because try to see anything get produced without them, right? I mean, it's just so you need it, but you also gotta have room for innovation and to encourage it. And so I really fell in love with the socialist writings of a guy named Michael Harrington and a few people along those lines, who said we just really need to have a society that encourages development and creativity and allows for rewards for being innovative and hard work, but maybe doesn't have such extreme rewards for success and such extreme punishment for failure. That we taper it off, and maybe just at a certain point you can give some of it back, right? Whether it's in the form of taxes or something else. But and of course there's a lot of discussion about what that looks like, and what do we actually have, and then maybe there's certain industries that really just don't work for the private market. I mean, medicine, does it really work if you're a market-oriented business and you got to sell things to make money? Then are you going to benefit from a healthy population? I'm not saying that means you want everybody to be sick so you can sell medicine, but you've got a conflict of interest there, right? So doesn't it make more sense that maybe that's an industry that should be more socialized than not? But what does it look like, and how do you make it efficient, and the rest? Well, there are a lot of different models of it, and so that's where it comes in. And then, but it's so much. It's like either this or that, and and we need to look at. It's like, so people ask, "Are you a socialist?" It's like, it really depends on who's asking. If you're Mitch McConnell, I'm a socialist because everybody to the left of Kennedy's a socialist to you, right? But if you're one of these guys, in up on the campus that's in the, what is it, the I'm forgetting what the organization is, but it used to be Maoist. I forget what it is now. But I'm going to be a revisionist to you, and no, I'm not a socialist. I'm just a pretender, right? So it just depends. And but to me, it's sort of like, I'll defend it tooth and nail against people. I'll even defend the Communist Manifesto against people who've never bothered to read the thing. Read it, then criticize it.
Well, there are people that promote communism that haven't read it.
Yeah.
They won't even look at it.
Oh yeah, no kidding. No, it's and there are people who promote critical race theory that don't even know what it is. I try to explain to people, no, they don't teach critical race theory in high school or below. It's not. It's a theory. It's an approach to the study of law, and maybe extended to the study of history, but it's very advanced. There is no critical race theory there. What happened was a critical race theory book got into some materials that were intended for teachers to review so that they would have some awareness of the teaching, and they were optional materials, and all of a sudden this got translated into, this is one of the biggest things, frauds that's been perpetrated, the whole thing. There is no critical race theory being taught in any high school or elementary school anywhere in this country, and yet you'll have people saying, yeah, I want them to continue to teach critical race theory. It's like, do you realize you're playing into a complete fraud of a thing? There is no critical race theory being taught in any high school or elementary school, and I want to scream it from the mountaintops, but nobody will hear me because they're all online, and I can only get to so many people online.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out, because I was under the impression that it was being taught.
It's not. There are some bad things being taught. Some things that are maybe over the top, but it's not critical race theory. They're just labeling anything they don't like critical race theory, right? That's become the term, and
it definitely is a catch-all.
Yeah,
I'll give you that.
And what happens is I think what has happened is that people send their kids off to college, and then they come back for the first Thanksgiving, and their kids say, "Yeah, I attended a critical race theory seminar," and blah blah blah, and so now they hate it, So that's what happened. But that's the level at which you do it. It was created to basically explore the degree to which the court systems or the systems of legal justice could be influenced by racism.
Yeah, I haven't even heard it in that context.
Yeah,
I've
well,
heard it in the context that it's that the United States was obviously built on the back of slavery and that it is inherently a race-driven society.
that's a theory. That's not what critical race theory is. That is a theory that's out there, and
Is that a sub-theory in critical race theory?
It's not. See, the critical race theory is actually not even a theory in that sense. It's an educational approach. It's an approach towards studying law, and it's been extended to history, where you look at history from the point of view of saying, how have these institutions possibly been influenced by racism? If so, and sometimes they would conclude, I don't think those decisions or that area of law has been all that influenced by it. It's a frame of inquiry. I mean, it's kind of complicated even for an undergrad, actually. I mean, it's really meant for law school. Even Ben Shapiro admitted that. He said, "Yeah, I encountered it in law school. I didn't like it then, but and when people ask him, well, yeah, somebody even tried to corner on it. Well, it's not taught in the high school. You're like, it has different meaning now. Well, it has different meaning now because it's been appropriated." Like it, but it really isn't that, and it got turned into this whole thing, and now it's like the rallying cry.
Well, I think that partly plays into the fact that gender is being pushed in school, and so then people hear race on top of that, and
Right.
it's a firestorm.
Yeah.
It hits the two markers that get everyone worked up.
Yeah. I don't know. There was a NPR report this morning about there are two school districts in Florida, and one of them under this what is it, the woke is something law? I can't remember what.
It's not the don't say gay bill.
No, it's the it's that in combination with the anti-woke law. I can't remember, but one of the districts is going extreme. They are telling every teacher to take all of their books out of their classroom to be reviewed by a committee that's going to have to take all the time to go through all of the books and look at it. I mean, and that they have to plan out every lesson and have it approved from the beginning to end, that there's not going to be anything that's going to be taught in class impromptu. There's not going to be like, something happened in the news today, we're going to do something about that. Nothing like that. It's just, and if you're teaching math, that might work because you got a definite thing you got to teach, right? But history, current event, well, we don't even have current events classes anymore. But it's just, but you want to try to, if you want to make history engaging, you got to relate it to things that are happening. You got to be flexible that way. And it's just, that one district. Now another district is saying, no, we're not doing that. No, we're not going to do that. And they've taken a totally different approach as to how they're going to comply. So it just but it's yeah. I'll send you the link if I find it. I'll send it to you because it's an interesting dichotomy as to how they're happening, and it's a little scary. And maybe it all comes down to how they read it. I mean, in Texas, it goes from district to district too, as to how they are interpreting their law against critical race theory. What constitutes critical race theory? Is it anything that makes a white child feel bad about their history? Well, what does that even mean? I mean, I learned some of the most harsh stuff. My parents exposed it to me, but I never felt guilty about it. I wasn't there. It's just, so I don't know why I should.
Well, the simple fact is you shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, if we take an objective look at the
Right.
situation.
So I never did, and I was never taught to do that. And yeah, I mean, I knew about the Japanese prisoner of war camp, the Japanese, pardon me, not prisoner of war. They were the internment camps. I learned it because there was a great movie about it, Farewell to Manzanar, that I got to see as a kid. That my parents made sure I could see. And I thought, well, man, that really sucked, and it was bad, but I didn't order it. I wasn't even around. So, I just, it's not a question of that. And I don't feel guilty. I do feel like, the people who lost their homes should be paid for what they lost. I do feel like that was there, especially since there are people who are still alive who ought to be done that way. Reparations for slavery, I think, is a little more complicated, but I'm all for it if it gets turned into some kind of program or something like that makes up for something, or some kind of symbolic thing. I don't know how would go for it, but that I should own up to what my ancestors did. Well, I don't. Most of my family wasn't even here before the 1900, so I'd have to go back to the Vikings, and I'm sure they did plenty of raping and pillaging that I had to feel real bad for, and I probably owe it to the poor English that they.
That's what I always fall back on, and I don't know if I just can't understand it contextually, is that the idea of slavery and of these conflicts has been around since human beings have been around. And I don't know if it's just the black and white aspect is closer to us historically, that's what we focus on. But you have, Caesar wiping out the Celts. You have these examples of people being persecuted by their belief systems, by their race, going back as far as our history goes back.
Well, I think in this case, it's different because you've got set patterns that still exist. That you see, it set them at a disadvantage.
Yes, you could make that argument where it still is. You still feel some of those ripple effects, especially in buying houses in the banking systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea that you are perpetrating that just because you're white, and now your ancestors, how does that track?
I think the idea, and this is where it gets mistranslated, is that I benefit from it. Is that, I benefit from that, and so I ought to be working to change that, even though it might make, maybe I won't benefit as much in the next generation or something. Just the same way. And I do believe there is implicit bias. I think it's overstated, but I do believe that it's there. And I'll give you an example in my own life. I went to work for UPS when I was in college, a loader, and there were 15 positions open for loading trucks. And I would say there were about 40 to 50 somewhere applicants. And most of them were Black, Latino, or Filipino. And there were 6 of us who were white. And we had interviews, and I got there for my interview. It was supposed to be at 4:30. I remember this very clearly. And I was waiting in there, and the gentleman before me was African American. His interview had started at 4, and he came out. He looked rattled, and he came out, and they were done at like about 4:40, maybe between 4:40 and 4:45, and I thought I was going to be in there for longer. I thought maybe everything was being backed up because of longer stuff. I was done in no time. They asked me some questions. The longest time that was spent was I told them UC Santa Cruz I didn't know had a street address because it was just everything was just sent with the post office. And he says, no, they have to have a street address. And so he had people making calls, wasting that time. But they asked me a little bit about my background and the rest like that. And I was pretty sure I was hired after that. So I had much less of an interview. Now, I don't know what, maybe there were certain things about the guy, that he was trying to give him a chance. I don't know. That's anecdotal. That's not evidence. But the interesting thing was that when it was done, of the 15 people who were hired, all 6 white people. Now, that's quite if that's a statistical anomaly that all 6 of us would be qualified to load trucks. What it is they want people they can trust. They don't want people who are going to steal stuff that they fall out, try to throw stuff over the fence. That's really what they're really key about. I think this guy had implicit bias. I don't think he purposely discriminated. I don't think he said, "Oh, a white person, I'm going to hire that person." I think he genuinely felt like he was really good at sensing things out in a person, and probably because just looked at me smiling from the suburbs Pacifica, and felt, yeah, this kid can do it. Yeah, this kid's gonna not gonna is least likely to do anything dishonest than the rest, based on all of his based on his perceptions, probably believing that he was being fair. But statistically, I tried to even do it later in a polynomial fashion. The chances of six random, if it was purely random, pretty low, like something like 1 in 200 or something.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
if it wasn't random, if he was looking at records or employment history or these outside things, what I always wonder is how much, because there's continue.
No, just if you're right, then the bias wasn't his implicit bias, but the systemic bias by the fact that my background as a white person and all of the opportunities I had gave me the advantage.
But was he checking resumes or looking at anything?
He checked mine.
So, I mean, if you are looking at other people's resumes and finding things on there,
Right.
Don't get me wrong, racism is definitely prevalent. That is
Right.
a real thing. But I always wonder how much people are interpreting something that might not be there to some extent, right? Because
I agree.
That is anecdotal in the sense that you don't have anything to back up that there was
I can't
a
prove
bias.
it.
Yeah.
I can't prove it. I'm not absolutely certain, and it may be that the six white people were of the 15 most qualified. But it's but if you look at it statistically, I did the calculation. I mean, it's like a 1 in 200 chance of that when you put everything together, randomly
Just
speaking.
picking random.
Just picking random.
But if you were an employer, you wouldn't just pick random.
No, you would look at their qualifications. So and you get a feeling from them during the interviews. So if it wasn't, let's exclude it and say it was based on our backgrounds, then at the very least, the opportunities we had gave us the advantage, because that's what's reflected on our resume, that our ability to show ourselves. So that also is a little bit of a background, because our backgrounds are what gives us those opportunities, that I had all these other things that I could put on my resume, and also the educational opportunity, and the way I was raised, and having parents who valued education, and their
Your
parents and the
economic
rest,
status.
and all of that, to be able to present myself in a certain way and on my resume. So those are all definite advantages too, if it was if there wasn't there. So whether or not it was his perception of racism, or whether or not it was just the racism of the system, or the inherent. The point is that my being white gave me a definite advantage in that thing. Now you might say, okay, it was also my socioeconomic class. Maybe if I was working class white, coming out of one of the southern states or something, I wouldn't have been hired.
That is something I need to work on, because, and I'm going to say this without having really given it a lot of thought, but I feel as though a lot of the racism is just socioeconomic status. That really we're all unified depending on your economic status.
Right.
In poverty, we're all the same. Skin color doesn't matter. If you're black, if you're white, it doesn't matter if you're poor, because you're just poor.
Right.
You're a black person that is poor is the exact same as a white person that's poor. You have more in common amongst those two than someone that is of a higher economic status.
And other than black people are disproportionately poor in terms of numbers, but sure, if you were to look at it that way, and in fact, if you look at the figures for people who are shot by police, right? Okay, now one of the things that a lot of conservatives like to say is, well, more white men are shot than black men. That's true, but you're making it an arithmetic issue and not an algebra issue. More sure, I think 30% of the people that are shot are black men, but they're only 13% of the men, right? So disproportionately, they're shot more. And the interesting thing is the group that's shot least proportionally are Asian men, less than white men. Latino and white men are approximately equal. Maybe Latino tend to be slightly more, and the rest. But nobody's done the numbers specifically, but there was an attempt to try to look into socioeconomic, and somebody pointed out if you're upper middle class, you'll have almost no chance of being shot, no matter what your color is.
Well, exactly, right?
Yeah.
If you're of a lower class, you're probably not in a great area. There's
Right.
probably more violence. There's probably more opportunities to get entwined with a gang.
Your manners aren't necessarily the same.
Yeah.
As somebody
Your
you haven't been
your
socialized the
ethics
same
might
way.
not be the same because you're
Yeah.
just trying to get by. So
Right.
if you have to steal to get by, you're going to steal.
The police you have had worst experience.
You're going to have more run-ins with the
Yeah.
police.
Right.
They're-
And not only that, the police that you encounter have had more run-ins that maybe have them more on edge than
Maybe more violent
Yeah,
encounters.
right,
Yeah.
no, a lot of those things are factors in it.
It seems to me that people are always so quick to jump to race or gender. Gender is pretty prominent too. I was
Right.
talking to a girl and she was talking about this employment opportunity that she had at a lumber yard, and they didn't pick her, but they picked her brother.
Right.
And she was like, it was sexist. And I was like, yeah, but it kind of would make sense because your brother is a bigger guy. I know both of them. Your brother
Sure.
is a bigger guy. He can lift more. That's a laborious job. I'm going to pick, if you have a girl that's just shredded, 6'2", built
Sure.
like an ox, and a guy who's 5'4",
They
and
might pick- yeah.
I would pick the girl.
Right.
It's just, and it sucks maybe, but
Right. If it was a
you need
bona fide qualification.
yeah, you need someone that can do the job.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I don't know. Maybe it was
But
sexist,
maybe they didn't give her a chance to show that she could do the job.
Maybe, yeah,
And
but
that-
the inclination is always to jump. I didn't
Yeah.
get this because I'm this,
Right.
because I have this, because I look like this.
It could be, but it also could. It might not be that was the only thing that made her jump to the conclusion. It could have also just been the attitude that she felt. So
She did, yeah. I use her as an example because
Yeah.
she didn't really have anything other than she was a girl. There was no
Okay,
inclination
all right. Well,
of,
who knows?
you know.
You
But
don't
that
know.
it's just weird that we, and it's just us as people. We always jump to it was something that was out of my control. That's why I
Yeah.
didn't get this thing. And sometimes it definitely is,
Right.
and sometimes it's not.
And sometimes it's a factor. It may not be the controlling factor, but sometimes it's a factor. And we all want to have a society where it's not going to be a factor, right? But and it may never come where it's never a totally factor. But then, as somebody said, we'll find new ways to discriminate against each other. We'll find new bigotries to have.
Yeah, that checks out.
I mean, it's just, certainly, you want to feel like you had the chance, and you want to have a society that's open to everything. A lot of people also judge it like, well, I'm not going to be happy until half the car mechanics are women, right? But maybe there aren't that many women that are actually interested. Maybe, but you want to have room for the 1 in 7 people who want to be car mechanics who are women, right? So
Well, that's
yeah.
another thing, right?
Yeah.
People always point to, oh, the CEOs are usually a majority male.
Right.
Well, construction workers are also
Majority
mainly male.
Yeah. Yeah.
People that work on roads, people that pick up trash. It's like, should we make those more equitable? Should we mandate a 50% break in women?
It just depends. Some of the complaints of the CIOs do come from some very specific complaints about the dynamics. So as opposed to the other things, they do actually. There are women with some very specific ways of saying, I was shut out of that meeting. I was denied this opportunity and the rest, and they can actually point to it, and that's why they win lawsuits.
Yeah, sure. I 100% agree with that, but that's never the example, right? It's never,
Right.
oh, there aren't enough women in these laborious jobs. It's always, oh, there aren't enough women in these
yeah.
upper
I mean, well, you
echelons.
you do hear about it. Why aren't there more, women car mechanics? But
I've never heard that in
But
my
there are
life.
more women car mechanics now than there were 50 years ago because there is more permission for them to be so. There still is discouragement of it, but then sometimes there's discouragement of men from being it too, because hey, you don't want to do that, right?
That's also almost another economic status thing.
Yeah.
Where, oh, you don't want to do that job because it's beneath you. should do something a little more. You should be a lawyer.
Right.
You should be a doctor.
Well, I mean, the joke in my family is the reason I went to law school is because I make a lousy carpenter. Almost every other male in my family swings a hammer for a living, and they make good money as contractors. But it's just, but yeah, that is the kind of joke.
Almost the flip for you, yeah.
It is. It's 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 real kind of funny. But I was bored. I couldn't stand it. So I did it for a while. I like it. I miss the smell of the wood and everything, but that's what everybody else was doing. But I got into other things, and that was good. But I daydreamed too much. That was what my cousin told me.
Where did the fascination with history come in? Was that through pursuing law? Just reading?
When I was a kid, got into, oh God. I think I was watching things on television about history, and I just got into reading about it, and then there were historical stories. I mean, to me, one of the most fascinating stories to me when I was a kid was Sounder. Have you ever heard of that book? It's about a African-American family during the Depression trying to get a school built, actually an African-American community trying to get a school built for Black children, and the troubles that they were going through doing it. Sounder was the name of the family dog, but the story that was going on around him. Just an incredible story. And I ended up going and reading the book after I saw the movie, kind of reverse, and was just, I mean, and then when I was in the 6th grade, the story Roots came out. Alex Haley, which was his bit fictitious, but his family roots tracing all the way back to West Africa, where his ancestor Kunta Kinte had come across, and then it goes from generation to generation right up to Alex Haley. He helped Malcolm X write the autobiography, and I was fascinated with that. I got fascinated with World War II. I got fascinated with the Civil War, the battle between the Monitor and the Merrimack, and I couldn't find out who won. I kept trying to go through all the books who won, and found out that it was inconclusive. That was two of the first 2 metal ships that were shooting at each other, and they just shot each other for like a half hour before they gave up and went home. It was just in the river, but and it just I don't know, kept drawing me, and it made me. I always kind of felt like, well, these were the people, like my grandmother and my grandfather were telling me about, my step-grandfather, telling me about their lives. I don't know. I just got fascinated with it. And then there was a series, I think also, here's something else to consider watching. World at War, I think, is the best documentary history series ever made. I mean, I love all the stuff that, the guy does the PBS documentaries about jazz and baseball and all that stuff. But this one was made in the late 60s when they were interviewing people who were just kind of getting over being shell-shocked and just before they were sliding into old age. So perfect memories of it with great footage. It was a social history of the war done in Britain, about, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 30 episodes. And I was transfixed in the 4th and 5th grade watching it through the whole thing. And it was fascinating because it doesn't focus, I mean, there's fighting in it, you see footage of it, but it was focused on the impacts on the society of the war, of how ordinary people were trying to survive through these cataclysms in Russia and in China and in on the islands and the rest, and the impacts and the permanent impacts on it, and that's also where I was exposed to the Holocaust. I was just like blown away by it, and by that episode, that was my first real. I'd heard about it, but that was where I first saw it, and I was just like, oh man, and so yeah, I just and then there were some movies that took place in history that I really got into, and. Yeah, by the time I didn't really like the way history was being taught at school. I was kind of bored with it. And then I got annoyed with my father because my father was always concerned with how I was being taught it wrong, right? He's one of these left-wing parents that was worried that my teacher's going to, teach me the wrong way, and it's like, and so he would be correcting stuff, about this stuff, and I'm like, Dad, is this going to be on my test? He said, well, no, it's not. And it's like, then I don't need to know it, do I? It's just like he always thought I was going to be apolitical. My kid's going to be apolitical. Well, he turned out wrong about
Yeah,
that.
right.
Just,
I'll have to look into that. That sounds fascinating.
World at War is an excellent series. It's yeah, I think it may even be available in the library. I'm not sure, but it's yeah. I mean, there was. I stayed up. My parents would actually let me stay up later than normal. I was supposed to be in bed at 9 o'clock on Sunday night because it was. But when this came on, I was allowed to stay up till 10, and I would not miss it. I was just like, and there's a whole music to the beginning of it that just was like, I hear it now and it just like resonates with me.
Captured you.
Yeah. And just the whole opening. There's an opening sequence that talks about, the initial invasion of France, where these soldiers came in and they killed everybody in this town. And within a few weeks, all of those soldiers would be dead, every, single one of them. And the soldiers that killed those soldiers would be dead. And it was just like, and it was a poetic opening as to what this war really was. It was not a glorification of it at all. I mean, it just really was a reality type of thing. There was no rah rah going, and really the you kind of you look at Stalin and you say, I mean, he was horrible, one of the most horrible people ever, but you got to respect his courage, because that was the thing I noticed there. His advisors and military people wanted to slip him out of Moscow when he was when the Germans were like within eyesight, out in range, and he said, no, he said that we've got to make the stand here, and he had also called in Siberian troops, taking a huge chance that Japan was going to attack from that side. They didn't, luckily, but they were the crack troops for the snow, and winter was already coming down and really hit the Germans hard, but they had no idea that was going to work, and he made himself visible for the troops to see, to know that he was still there. And not sneaking away somewhere safe where he could rule from afar. I mean, whatever else you want to say about him, murdered or whether he personally murdered him or just was responsible for this process that killed 7 million people in a couple of years, he put his own line there, because if the city had fallen, he would have been dead. It was just like, and so it's sort of like, God, how You look at that and it's like, people are complicated. It's just, he must have really believed in what he was doing. It's just like, it wasn't just a cynical power thing. And it's like, do I like him? Do I not? I mean, it's like,
what do you make of these new age groups that really like Stalin and promote socialism, promote communism? Do you think they just don't understand?
They don't understand. They don't believe it. They think Khrushchev was a CIA plant, which is impossible. There's a real funny, kind of dark, funny movie out called Death of Stalin, where God, I forget the name of the actor who plays Khrushchev, tried to come to power with everybody in the power vacuum, but no, it was brutal, and you might have heard the term tanky. Okay, well, that's being used a lot to people who hearing left-wingers who support Putin right now in the Ukraine. There's a debate within the left because there's some people who either support Putin or are more critical of the United States than they are of Putin, blame NATO for the invasion. And I'm not saying NATO isn't at fault. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There are some things that probably it could have been done better all the way around. But anyway, the term tanky comes from a time when in the 1950s, when in Hungary, Soviet tanks went into Hungary to put down a protest there against the regime, and then in the 1960s, I talked about the convention, a lot of demonstrations were happening all over the world of New Left demonstrations. Czechoslovakia, they had a New Left there in Prague, and tanks were sent in to shut them down. As brutal as it was in Chicago, it was nowhere near what as brutal as it was in Prague. And you always found the leftists that were saying, well, it was justified. Sending in the tanks was justified. So when you hear, if you're online, you hear one left winger saying, "Oh, here come the tankies again." That's what they're talking about. Is people who will justify Russia or the Soviet Union being repressive.
So they just don't understand the real extent of what happened out there.
They don't. They think
you mentioned the Peace and Freedom Party, and there's a chapter here locally. I tried to get a couple of them on, but their view. I mean, they were touting Maoist China,
because there is a group called the Peace and Justice something, I can't remember. They're a break off from the Workers' World Party, which originally was a Trotskyist party that split off from the Socialist Workers' Party. If you ever see The Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie, you'll hear about them talking about the People's Front of Judea. No, we're the front of People's Judean Front, and the People's Front of Judean are fighting the Judean Front of the People, and all of these groups fighting each other. Well, you've got the Workers' World Party, the party, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Communist Workers' Party. You got all these different groups fighting each other and splitting off from each other, and they'll yell at each other, call themselves splinters. So from the Socialist Workers' Party, which I was in, which was the original Trotskyist split off from the Communist Party, came the Workers' World Party, or the Marcyites, led by a guy named Marcy, who didn't like the fact that the Socialist Workers' Party was supporting the Hungarian Revolution as the Trotskyist revolution against Stalin. They believed that it was... I might even have them reversed. I'm not sure, but one of them. So they supported opposite sides, and then that guy came in, and that group existed until the late '90s, and it split into it. And the Party for Liberation and Justice, I think that's what it's called, the Party for Liberation and Socialism, has kind of taken over the local Peace and Freedom Party chapter. And that's them, and that's their group.
And so they're a little more radical.
They're a little more radical. Peace and Freedom Party was a lot different back then. It got into trouble right away. It was going to run, oh God, what was the name of the black comedian? I'm forgetting his name. He joked about February. Of course, they're going to give us that month.
Not Dave Chappelle again.
No. We're talking about back in 1968.
Oh.
They were going to run him as president. He'd been a civil rights activist, but he was older and more of the Martin Luther King set than the more radical set. And in California, unlike the other states where the Peace and Freedom Party was forming, there was a group that came in and said, we're the black contingent, and you white people chose him, and we want Eldridge Cleaver. Problem was Eldridge Cleaver wasn't 35 yet, so he didn't even get to be on the ballot, even though he was nominated. Well, those are white man's rules, right? I mean, this is how dumb it gets, and the rest. So that was the first time. So they had somebody on for vice president, a woman, I don't remember her name, and the rest. The second time they ran a candidate, it was Dr. Benjamin Spock, guy who wrote a book about child rearing, and anyway, and they would get 3 or 4% of the vote. They were the left alternative party. You would vote if you wanted to cast a protest vote because you thought the Democratic Party candidate was getting too conservative or wishy-washy or whatever. So that went into the 80s. I actually voted for a few of them for a while, and this was before the Green Party came along, and now they're kind of contesting which is going to be the left party in town, left sheriff in town, but it became a battleground as to which sectarian group was going to control it. Communist Party wanted to. There was some other group that was going to. Now it seems like that particular group wants to have it, because there's really not a lot of people involved in it. And if there's a vacuum like that, then they're going to be able to kind of take it. But that doesn't mean the party itself stands for it. It was, but my parents were involved in that formation. They saw what was happening. And by 1972, they voted for McGovern. They weren't part of it anymore. And so it was just so yeah. There's a history there, and and this is the only state with that party. We're also the only state with Wallace's party in it, the American Independent Party.
I don't think I've heard of that party.
It's a conservative party, very conservative party, and that got taken over by what's called the John Birch Society, which is an anti-communist group that started in the Cold War. John Birch, they consider to be the first victim of the Cold War. He was a missionary that got shot in China.
Here's the real question. Do you think with all this political strife going on and the division and the extremism in these two parties that we might actually have a shot of a third party gaining some prominence?
We don't have the setup for it here. See, in other countries, you got the parliamentary system where it's not winner takes all. If you get a certain amount of votes, then you get representation in the parliament, and you can build on it. And if neither of the other side has a majority, you can actually wheel and deal and say, "Hey, okay, we'll join votes and we'll make your candidate prime minister, but we want this and this in return for that." I mean, and you can build on it. We don't have that here. It's winner take all.
What about just an independent candidate?
We've had them. A guy named Ross Perot tried it in 1992, got a lot of votes, even got more than Bill Clinton in Utah, but it just wasn't enough. And people are always worried about splitting a vote when you got the other side, especially with Trump.
That's the big thing right now with Biden is people are worried if he wants to run again, who's going to run in the party?
I'm guessing he's not going to run again.
I could see him running again.
I don't know.
If he's still breathing.
I think he intended to be a one-term president. I think he wanted to get certain things done in that time. But I don't know. I could be wrong. But 88,
he said he's going to run again.
Yeah, but he has to. You can't. You don't. If you say you're not going to run again, then you become not just a lame duck, but a dead duck president. I mean, it's you have
to keep the fire.
You got to keep it going. You got to keep it going. So whether or not he actually does run again, he's going to say he's running again, no matter what. But who would do it? Kamala Harris is not shining at all.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, it's not. So then who is it? Well, Gavin Newsom looks like he's pumping to
God, I hope I hope that people do not vote for him.
He is.
I mean, he squeaked out the running for governor because the candidates were just so poor.
They were so bad, but the real mistake was the recall. Whenever you try to do a recall against somebody, they come out smelling like a rose, and it was just.
Well, in the primary recall candidate, who was that? He was a radio guy.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. That's the only guy we can find in the state to run.
No. Well, it's real. It's hard, and but he's the shining guy, and right now California is got surpluses and all this kind of stuff.
Meanwhile, it's falling apart at the seams.
Yeah, except for all the money people are making. It's just but yeah, you're right. It's we've got homeless problem now. Granted, we do tend to get everybody else's homeless coming here, but still, we've got these problems. We got
crime is just through the roof,
and people are leaving because they can't afford the rent or to buy a house. So it's just it is real hard to deal with, but. And then there is always the question, what can a governor do about that, right? What can even a legislature do about that? There are certain things they could do, but it's, this is, what do you do about the homeless, right?
I had a guy on actually the other day, John, and we were talking about...
John Shelter?
John Shelter.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, he was fantastic. He's got some ideas. He's got some ideas that sound like they're working.
Are they local ideas?
Yeah, he's implementing. He's got a crew. They go around. They get contracted out to go clean up stuff.
He does some good things, but I do think that there needs to be a national policy.
Oh yeah, you're not going to solve I mean, unfortunately, because he's out here
right.
putting up a fight, but you're not going to solve it with just one
No,
guy.
because if we start solving it, then people are going to come here, right? Oh God, they got him off the street.
Well, and if you start solving it, what happens to the money? What happens to the cash flow and the people that are banking on that?
No, it's got to be there. There really needs to be a national task force that looks at it in terms of joining all different kinds of policies together. First of all, you got to look at the endless wars. I mean, the homelessness, the last time it was like this was the 1980s, and they said that half of the homeless people were Vietnam War veterans. So we got to look at that factor, but also just the drugs, how strong they are these days. And the and what do we do about that? And what do you do about homeless? I mean, it's, you can't just throw them in jail. You can't,
You can't, but you can't just let them camp and trash.
So what do you do?
That's the problem.
What do you do? I mean, it's just.
And who wants to actually do anything?
It's real hard, but it's got to be a regional to national policy, but nobody talks about it on the national level. Nobody in their presidential running for president says, I want to take care of the homeless problem by doing this. Now, why don't they have so many homeless people in Europe? And I asked about that. And well, it's a little bit of an issue because one of the things they have in Europe that we don't have here is we can only commit people if they are a danger to themselves or others, physical danger to themselves or others. But in Europe, the constitutional rights are a little bit different there. They can do it in most of Europe. They can do it if it looks like they are not able to be functional on their own. And that's tricky because that's really, how do you define that?
It's a slippery line.
That's a very slippery line. But to a certain degree, that and you get people in there, and they get treatment. They are dragged, kicking and screaming, but then they get the treatment and say, "Oh yeah, I'm glad that happened to me." But that makes me think in terms of, "Oh God, you gave them drugs and they're happy." Haven't we seen science fiction movies about that? Where we've altered their mind and all of a sudden they're happy. I mean, it's just. So it's like, do we? There is a solution apparently, but do we want to go there?
And where does it go from there?
And where does it go? And how far is it? I mean, so we need to explore that. But I don't know. But also maybe now the science is more together where we can be more precise about some of those things. I don't know. I'm just not, or maybe we can get to that point. But that's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's scary because it sounds so great in theory, and if it just stopped there, it would be perfect. But it
how
never
do you,
does.
But what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be functional? I mean, and you want to get it ahead of time, because at a certain point it could be too late, right? So you got to get it early on. And how do you detect it? What are the signs? Start
watching people.
I know
everything they do
exactly.
all the time.
If they start, I mean, it's just. But they do not have as many. They do have some homeless people in Europe, but nothing like us. And yeah, we have a lot of the same problems, but I don't know. So
different world.
Yeah, and so but will we can do that, but do we give up a little bit of our national soul in doing it? I don't know, or more than that. I mean, so
yeah, I don't know. Giving up a freedom is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, it is. So
unfortunately, we gotta
end it there. Yeah, we've gone on forever.
It's already 8:00.
Oh my God!
I know. It's a time warp in here. Do you want to plug where people can find you, where they can find Redwood Wonk?
Sure. Redwood Wonk, you can find on YouTube if you want to see. Just plug in Access Humboldt, Redwood Wonk. You can also find us on. Go to the Access Humboldt Google. I forget exactly what it is, but I think it's Access Humboldt org, but I'm not absolutely sure of that. But you can also Google it and find it there. And we're also 96.7 KZZH on the radio. You can also find me on KMUD 88.1 from up here, or 8 point. Pardon me. God, my brain's going. You look up KMUD.
He's out there.
It's out there. But I'm on both of those, and look forward to hearing from you. And anybody want to talk to me about any of those things, you know how to reach me, either at work or through either of those entities. I love meeting people in coffee houses and talking about this stuff all the time. So,
all right, well, Eric, that was a blast, man. I had a hell of a lot of fun.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
All right.